If there is one thing I absolutely love, it is the pursuit of knowledge, and if you haven't noticed that yet by the looks of my videos, then I don't know where you've been. Or if you haven't been here before, please subscribe. But yes, that is correct, I absolutely love it when we talk about facts to do with Ninjago. And I've begun a very long running series where I'm going to talk about one fact from each episode of the show. And in this episode, we're going to be covering Season 2. But if you haven't seen any of my videos so far where I go through all of these aspects of the show, please do, because each single episode does have something interesting to say about it at the very least. But like I said, we are going to be talking about Season 2 today. So, just like that, let's get into Darkness Shall Rise. And this episode does have a fairly interesting little fact, and it's actually one I didn't notice until now. And that is, towards the end of the episode, where Garmadon is merging the golden weapons into the mega weapon, just before the weapon itself is revealed, you can actually hear the roar of a dragon. Now, I would like to show this, but unfortunately, LEGO does like to have their content under lock and key. So unfortunately, if you do want to see this, you're gonna have to look for it yourself. But I will say that it's very interesting to see this, but honestly it also does make sense. Because the power of creation is of course associated with the dragon, and the golden weapons themselves all do have dragon print on them, so it makes sense that you would hear something dragon related when you're doing something to the weapons in question. It also does just lead to a very interesting theory that the golden weapons are linked to the dragons in some way, and I guess technically you could say that they straight up are because of the source dragons, but it would make sense if there was a deeper meaning to it. So just like that, welcome to Theory 6, no. But yeah, this is just a cool little detail, and one I honestly never noticed until now, and it's just an interesting fact just in general. But other than that, let's move on to Pirates vs. Ninja. And what makes this episode really interesting is the fact that this episode does contain a real world reference. Well, more specifically a reference to a movie in the real world, but it is there nonetheless. But in the scene where Nia is turning up in her Samurai X mech, we do actually get a reference to Jurassic Park, because we see a pirate with a drink in his hand, and you can see where the drink itself vibrates in the approaching Samurai X mech. And it's a fun little reference to Jurassic Park, and it's definitely one I can appreciate as a fan of movies. But other than the fact that this episode also introduces Dareth, so basically this is when the show got good, that is it for the most part in terms of the fact for this episode. But I do think it's a very cool one, and a very unique one, because it's very rare something like this gets referenced in the show. But this does bring us on to the episode Double Trouble, and this one is a bit more fascinating, and again, one I didn't realise at the time, but in retrospect, it seems fairly obvious. This being that the Bizarro Ninja were actually designed with young Garmadon actually in mind. And what do I mean by this? I mean that you can see that the Bizarro Ninja are paler with red eyes, which is the exact same look that Garmadon has when he is younger and when the Great Devourers officially consumed him. And I've got to say, I think this is an absolutely fantastic detail, and I think it's just one that really does help when it comes to continuity, because if the Bizarro Ninja were created by Garmadon, it would make sense for them to resemble him as well. But that then brings us to the episode Ninja Ball Run, and I'm gonna be honest, there is not actually a lot to say when it comes to this episode, because it is just the standard big race plot that you see in a lot of shows, so there's not really much to really say about this one. What I will say about this one though is that it does comprise of a lot of different characters we've seen up until this point, and the race itself, apart from 2 police officers, is just full of those amazing characters, because you have the Ninja and the Ultrasonic Raider, you have Garmadon and the Serpentine and the Bounty, you have Ed and Edna in their car, the Serpentine Generals in a bus, Brad, Jean and the other Darkly students in their school bus, you've got the Mailman, Cruncher and Knuckle, Lloyd on the Dragon, the Royal Blacksmiths, Captain Soto, and that's about it. But it is such an amazing cast of characters that we've had up until this point, so it's a cool little combination to see everyone by that point in time. But like I said, there's not really much else to this episode apart from that. So, the fact is that this episode does just have a lot of returning characters. But just like that, let's move on to Child's Play. Now, Child's Play is fairly interesting because this episode completely breaks everything that we know about Ninjroids. Because Zane turning into a kid breaks 2 different rules that we've had. The first one being is that how does a robot actually age? We don't know the explanation of this. All we really know is that somehow the mega weapon was able to do it. Or you could look at it as the idea that Dr. Julian actually had a kid version of Zane that he just simply reverted back to. But I think that would have been shown to us before this point. So I do think it comes down ultimately to the mega weapon, but that is the first thing that broke what we knew about Ninjroids. The second one being is that as soon as the Ninja turned into kids, we do know that Cole asks Zane if we are dreaming, and Zane replies with the idea that Ninjroids don't actually dream. And this completely breaks Ninjago as we know it, because Zane dreams in Season 1 and Pixel dreams in Season 11. So, what's going on there? You could make the argument that both Zane and Pixel don't actually dream still, but they are rather just visions, but I don't think that really makes sense ultimately because they are described as dreams. So, this just simply breaks Ninjago as a whole, but people have said that this little block of episodes does just mess a lot with the continuity of Ninjago anyway, so it is what it is. But this episode is the single standing point of breaking everything we knew about Ninjroids. But this then does bring us to the episode Wrong Place, Wrong Time. And this episode is the singular episode that Tommy Andreasen has gone on note saying that there's very little logic to. But let's try and get some sort of logic out of this episode. And the fact for this episode is going to come from the remains of the mega weapon after it was destroyed, or rather erased. Because we know that it was erased, and we do know that a lot of the things reverted, such as Lloyd not knowing what the mega weapon was. But obviously there is still a lot of lasting effects, such as Soto and his crew still being around, the Destiny's Bounty still being in the air, Lloyd being older, and Scales himself mentions the mega weapon. But the main thing we do know when it comes to the mega weapon is that not everything was erased from its effects, but some of it also was. And the fact is that it comes down to the nature of chaos, as Tommy Andreasen has confirmed. But that is why some people remember it, some people don't, some of the events still exist, while some of the others don't. It's just simply seemingly a random bit of chance. And maybe that is the effect of when you put the power of creation against itself. Maybe it does create chaos. But unfortunately, it's something that hasn't really been expanded on. But that is the fact for Wrong Place, Wrong Time. But this then brings us to the episode The Stone Army, and it's officially the beginning of the final battle era of this season, so it's nice that we're finally out of that block of episodes. But a very interesting fact does come from it, and that is when you look at the scene where we see the bottomless pit, we do see a lot of fun little banners. The thing is that one of these banners depicts the Great Devourer in battle with a golden figure, and this presumably is the first Spinjitzu Master, because who else has the power of creation? And the fact is that this banner is there, and while it may be fiction, it is the implication that the first Spinjitzu Master has something to do with the Great Devourer's sealant, and that is how they were able to get him into the city of Ouroboros without relatively much hassle, because there's never been a note of the Great Devourer being much of an issue. But the thing is that this isn't confirmed, but it is a fact that a golden figure did take place in the battle against the Great Devourer initially, or at least the capture of the Great Devourer. And if it's not the first Spinjitzu Master, you could maybe assume that it was Wu, because obviously he is also a Master of Creation as well, but I do think a very good implication is that it's the first Spinjitzu Master himself. So it's cool to see that he was involved in more of these battles for Ninjago. But of course, after the Stone Army, we do get the day Ninjago stood still. And outside of the fact that these two episodes only took place a day between each other, the main fact I want to bring to you is the amount of references we simply got in this episode. And not actual events in the real world. I'm actually talking about the amount of events we see in the background of what's already happened in Ninjago. Because we see a scene where there's a ton of screens behind Zane. And let's see all of the footage that they're showing. And while there is a lot of duplicates, you can see the story of the golden weapons, you can see the Serpentine fight, you can see the romance film that Jay and Nia watched in the episode with Garmadon, you can see the Great Devourer, the invasion of Ed and Edna's junkyard, so on. There is so many references in this episode to previous events of Ninjago, and this might be because they thought the show was ending at this point, but it's a very cool thing to see. And it is just cool to see when Ninjago references itself. Obviously, none of these events could have been depicted or could have been captured in real time, but Ninjago was also full of instances of, well, where was the camera trying to depict this? But it is still a very cool little bit of referencing and some cool Easter eggs nonetheless, and that is the fact for this episode. But let's get on to the next episode, which is The Last Voyage, and even though this is the Stone Army season, I'm still not referencing the Stone Army at all, and that is not stopping now, because this fact actually involves Jay. Because did you know that Jay is actually in the one scene twice? Yes, that is true. You can actually see two versions of Jay, not on screen right next to each other, but they're both in the same area. And where is this, you may ask? Well, in the scene where Lou sings for Cole and the crowd is sat there clapping for him, we actually see the version of Jay that is from Child's Play. The young version of Jay is stood right there, and it's not an altered variant either, it is just Jay. Now, of course, they are just going to continue to use the assets that they own, and there's no point making new assets just for the background for a one-off scene. But it is very interesting that they landed on the J in such a prominent spot as well, because they had plenty of the Darkleys boys, they had plenty of the students, but they picked Jay specifically. So maybe it was a reference, who knows? But Jay is just sat there clapping along, and it's really cool to see in retrospect. Now I hope you guys are ready for a fact about the Stone Warriors for the episode Island of Darkness. Well, you're wrong, you're not getting it, because to be honest, this episode doesn't actually have a lot in the way of interesting facts, which is crazy considering how much actually happens. But for what it's worth, there is one little interesting fact to say the least, and that is that Brent Miller took over a dozen tries before he got the right version of one of Zane's lines, and that line is, "I got us into this mess, I know how to get us out," and you can actually see all of the other attempts on LEGO's YouTube channel. But yes, for some reason, he just could not get this line right for the life of him, and he took several attempts to actually get it done. But in the end, we got a fantastic line, and if Brent Miller is somehow watching this, please come on to a video with me, I would love to talk to you more about Ninjago. But this does bring us to the episode The Last Hope, and for once, are we going to talk about the Stone Army? No, we're not. This fact is actually going to be about the ninjas' swimming outfits that they use at the start of the episode, because they are all completely comprised of different variants of other minifigures. All of the ninja just have simply recolored variants of the surfer leg print from the CMF Season 2, and Kai specifically also has the torso of it, while Cole is actually gotten the airplane mechanic torso from the LEGO Indiana Jones sets. As for Jay and Zane's, their torsos, we do not actually know where they came from, but it's presumed that they are somewhere within their catalogue, or simply they do not exist. But none of the ninja actually have any sort of original design when it comes to these scenes, which is really interesting to say the least. Also, as a bonus, did you know that Kai's torso piece that was used in the scene is actually what Cole used in his flashback from the Golden Weapon, and Cole since presumably has gotten a bit more muscular because he no longer uses it, but it's interesting to see is that Kai took it instead. But now we are on to the second to last episode for the season, which is Return of the Overlord, and this one does have again a fairly interesting little fact to it. This being that, this is one of the earliest episodes that the Hageman brothers actually had going, because the first draft for this episode was actually completed November 8th, 2011, before Season 1 was even airing, so they've had this episode in mind for a fair bit of time. It's also been noted that this episode was initially called The Overlord Cometh, so we don't know whether this was a placeholder or if it was simply a stand-in, but that was the name initially associated with this episode. But honestly, it does make sense that this episode has been in the works for so long, because the Hageman brothers have gone on record and stated that it's possibly one of their favourite episodes, because they really enjoyed the point that Garmadon was making, and they liked the fact that Garmadon saw himself as the hero of his story. But just like that, we are on to the final episode of the season, and let's finally talk about the Stone Army. Nope, not really, let's actually talk about Garmadon. So I'm going to put a little bit of a fun one, because this isn't enough really in my opinion for the full fact, but I do want to point out that initially when Garmadon was purified and before they gave him his own face model, it's just Wu, and it just doesn't have the beard or the 3D mouth, instead actually being replaced with Jay's mouth, and that is the face that we were going to see for Garmadon, but of course then it was changed for Season 3. But of course, I do want to mention the original ending for this season, and that was going to see Wu staring off as he was seeing Garmadon and Misako reconcile. But Wu would have walked away and had the Overlord manifesting in his eyes as it faded to black. And honestly, this would have been so cool to see and would have made evil Tech Wu from the next season a bit cooler, but ultimately we got the ending which we did, which was more happier. So ultimately speaking, I'm glad we got what we did. But that about does it for the facts for Season 2, and let me know which ones you knew and which ones you didn't, because honestly, most of these I did not actually know, so this was quite fun for me to research. But also do let me know which one was your favourite of the bunch, and which one you do think made this episode more interesting that it came from. But other than that guys, that's about it for today, and thank you for watching. Take care, okay, bye!